Welcome to the UDR Social Impact Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Ward, and today we are going to continue with our series of people who dedicate their lives to helping Indigenous individuals, communities, and society at large. Today we have a special guest, a good friend of mine, Tammy Abrams. And she works at, Tammy, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Tammy Abrams. I'm the program manager for Indigenous Health at the Alex.
Awesome. And you've been in Calgary now, how long?
I've been in Calgary about a year.
Yep.
I've been in Alberta for almost 3 years. Wow. It's beautiful out here.
Yeah, you're settling in nice?
Yeah, I am. I've got the migraines under control with the Chinooks. I'm doing better.
Good. Yeah, those migraines, I started getting them this year pretty bad. And I never really have, but I really noticed this year with the weather shifts, I get pretty messed up.
Yeah, they can be debilitating.
And now that summer's here, it's kind of settled out.
Yeah. Thank goodness.
Good.
Yeah.
So Tammy and I first met when we worked for one of the nations close to Calgary. She came on board as, what was your role?
Community and Employee Wellness Coordinator.
And I was liaison protege, working with the people in the community, helping them with addictions and whatnot. And I remember first seeing you and heard about you. And then I stopped in your office and we just started shooting the shit, eh?
Yeah. I think you said you want to go for a drive.
Was that the first day?
I think it was the first day. It might have been the second day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like, let's go for a drive.
Yeah. You had something you had to do, and the journey began.
Yeah. That was a fun day, eh?
It was a good day.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was reckoning that I was like, I'm moving closer to where I need to be. I'm with like-minded people.
Yeah, we hit it off. I think we even high-fived at the end of the day, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, that was awesome. So yeah, Tammy, I wanted to have you on because I know you're well educated. You've dedicated your life to trying to make the world a better place in general, but specifically for Indigenous people. You have Indigenous blood in you, correct?
Yes.
Where are you from? Where's your background?
My background is European and Mi'kmaq. On my dad's side, they generations back, there's Mi'kmaq ancestry, and with the story of residential schools, it was something that my family didn't talk about.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't identify, and my grandmother told me we are Mi'kmaq, but we don't talk about that. And it was always a curiosity as I got older and felt to draw that connection to Mi'kmaq culture, and I ended up living in a community in Nova Scotia with my family, married a beautiful Mi'kmaq man, where my journey began and where I really began to understand how complex the history and the impact of that history has on our people within the Indigenous community as well as the non-Indigenous community. So it really began about 30 some odd years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been a ride.
So what drew you in your schooling years, I guess it would be, so you started kind of getting connected to the Mi'kmaq culture in your teens?
Late teens, in my 20s more so. And it was my family that sort of presented the medicine wheel, and I had an opportunity to apply that medicine wheel within my own life, but also share it with others, and being taught the power of that medicine wheel, the physical, the mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of all of us. And that's what makes us a whole person and makes us humanly perfect, which in essence is that we're imperfect. But there's a beauty in that. And so that began my journey, and learning from beautiful elder Jane Abram, who has since left and is in the spirit world, but a very powerful knowledge keeper and shared much of her wisdom. And I remember one of her favorite lines was, "Wait now." And she was speaking to, I think, our need to hurry up. Let's get this done and always wait now. And it's something I use and live by today is wait now. What am I seeing? What am I hearing? What am I understanding? If we take that time, we actually uncover so much more, kind of like you and your work you do.
That's beautiful. So it was basically a medicine wheel teaching that kind of opened the door to that?
Absolutely. I mean, I was always why as a kid, and that medicine wheel teaching answered my why. I didn't understand many things. That things didn't make sense. The world is complex and it's very harsh, sometimes black and white, very linear, and it didn't make sense. That medicine wheel brought in that circular ideology and worldview that seemed to create a sense of peace in me. So I was able to come up with things or answers that I was comfortable with for myself to be able to move forward and start my journey of learning and working with others and trying to create a better place for everybody. I think the big thing is accepting that the world isn't equal, the world isn't fair, and we all need to dig deep inside to identify ways that we can contribute to making it better, making it more equitable, making things more relevant and relative to all individuals. We're diverse. We need to identify that and accept that and recognize that everyone has something to contribute. A different worldview still has value within the colonial worldview and looking at those two strengths.
So as you were growing up, can you pull that mic just a little closer to you?
Sorry. Yep.
No, that's good. As you were growing up, you must have been witnessing aspects of life describing what you just said. So you must have seen that the world wasn't fair and things weren't, we are equal, but things weren't equal. And so you started developing ideas and an attitude on what you thought was right, where you could maybe help, and what did you see, and where did you get your start on your career path?
It was very definitely a personal awakening. The journey around a lot of social decisions we make, they can create situations where people experience risk. And so we're going to go back to, this is going to age me, back to the day of HIV and the whole learning and trying to understand and moving away from it's a gay man's disease because it's a human disease. It's in the name. And recognizing that people are vulnerable to greater conditions, risk factors, infections, ways of life based on some serious traumas that people experience throughout their journey. And that's where that inequity comes into play. Thinking back to hearing stories of other people's journey, not just my own, with sexual violence, family violence, and substance use addictions. There was a time where alcohol was the only substance that we really were concerned about, and it was pretty hard to pinpoint who was a social drinker, who was a problem drinker, who was an alcoholic. And the reality is those substances all play a factor in our lives. They affect our spirit. So my journey began with recognizing that the choices that we make, we don't even realize that we're making them, place us at great risk. And HIV came into my life, my world, my family, and it forced me to open my mind to how we got there through that capacity of love. I absolutely loved my family and my partner, and the struggle was real, the pain was real. How we got there, it wasn't a matter of judging how we got there. It was a matter of accepting that we need to find a way to make peace with what is existing in our life and that we are all entitled to a better existence and moving forward and supporting each other, finding a way without being afraid to support that person. And in this case, in a very intimate way, we were a family. We were a family unit, and there was this big thing that, socially was very scary, but on a day to day, it wasn't that scary. It was something else that was just added into our daily life that we needed to think about. It didn't change that we loved each other. It didn't change that we lived together. It didn't change that we had challenges and problems as well that could have exacerbated the whole situation and been more devastating to our family. But we persevered. Probably not pretty. There was lots of conflict, and in the end, my family was pulled apart due to the effects of addictions, some dementia related to HIV and AIDS, and the potential harm that could have come to me and my children. It was a journey where I had to accept that, no, this person wasn't going to hurt me in their consciousness, but the effects of what was going on had a huger impact on the behavior that was being displayed, and we needed to be safe, which also left me very vulnerable in the end. And I developed my own issues with substance misuse and had to climb out of that.
And as you're talking about this family incident with HIV, and you kind of rolled into, addictions issues within your own family, your own journey of abuse by the sounds of it, would it be okay if I brought up who this might be?
The person who abused me?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a family member, and I was a child. As far as like the HIV and some family violence, it was my husband and my children's father. We had 2 children, and my doctor had called me and said, you need to come in and we need to test you for HIV because your husband he went to the doctor's office because we were separated at the time, and I wasn't taking his calls. I was really trying to build that space so that I could establish some boundaries. And so he went to my doctor, doing the responsible thing, making sure I knew, because we had children. And it turned out that myself and my children were negative. From that moment, when I found that out, my heart also sank, because then I recognized again that my husband was alone. And it broke my heart, and it was another way for us to reconnect. And we did try to stay connected, because I didn't want him to be alone. I didn't want him to be isolated. He was part of a family. He was the father to my children, and they're amazing. But they too now have walked a journey in their life as adults, growing up without a father. And we're talking back in the 90s when, treatment for HIV wasn't where it is today. And people were very much, my husband's perspective was a guinea pig, and he didn't want to be a guinea pig, so he wouldn't take any of the medications that were available. And he did get sober, which was beautiful. He drove me crazy. He'd leave me sticky notes of things that needed to be done and things he wanted to accomplish. But we were also within an environment that was really challenging. And so he was sober a few times, but he also went back to the alcohol and some other substances. But on that journey, there was lots of times where the anger and the pain would come out, and it would. I was the target of the anger, and I had to learn that I was in the position where I was exposing my children to that harm as well, even though at the time I didn't see it that way, and it was expected all around me to remove myself and my children from that environment. it was really hard to do because I didn't want him to be alone.
Hold on, I want to interject here. So when you guys took a break previous, he stepped out and had extramarital affairs, although you weren't together, and that's how he acquired HIV, or did he acquire it through intravenous drug use?
It was intravenous drug use, and it was before we even met.
No way.
Yeah, yeah. So he didn't know, and it was in our journey with having a family that he found out, because he was actually, it was part of the process for him to get sober. We had separated because of the alcohol use, and we all know that that can be very tumultuous and crazy. So we had separated, and in his journey to recovery, they did a test, and he was told that he was HIV positive.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was really quite the journey for him, for me, for our family, for his family. It was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's part of what shaped you to be this amazing human here, and he was Indigenous?
Yes. Yeah, he was Mi'kmaq. He was a beautiful man. And his smile would light up the room. He was generous and kind. There isn't anything he wouldn't do for anyone.
Wow.
But he also had those demons, those struggles, and it changed who he was, which made it a very conflicting relationship, which kind of, from what I understand now and how I ended up being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, going through all of that over a long period of time. And in the end, I was directed by correctional services to put as much distance between myself and my children and him as possible, because he physically couldn't travel, but he was still very angry. So I had moved across the country, and yet I still longed to want to be there to support him, to let him know he's not alone, and that there was no more shame that he needed to carry, because I think, I know he carried a lot of shame and around being HIV positive, and at times.
And the anger and
Yeah.
the substance abuse and not being able to be the father he wanted to be and the husband he wanted to be. And
Yep. There was
Wow.
an incident where we were cooking and he cut himself pretty bad. And the sheer panic that went all over his face. And we immediately wrapped it up and got in the car and went to the doctor and kept the kids in the back seat. And, kind of the abruptness of, don't touch that, get away. You could see the pain at a much deeper level. It's not that he cut himself. It's not that, he had HIV. It was that I am a real risk to my family. And that pain was incredibly strong. And it was, as much as it was, kind of what tore us apart, it was also what kept me longing to want to be there.
well, you could always see his heart and who he truly was
Absolutely.
under the mask of the anger and the shame and what he had to do to try to cope with
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. It was hard.
And then so you boot across the country with your kids and I think I remember you telling me you had to keep that quiet, right? And so I couldn't imagine the conflict that you're going through, having, loving the man and his heart, but having to do what you have to do for your own well-being and your family. And wow, those are some tough choices, eh? How old were you when you moved across country?
I was 32. And I drove with 3 kids across Canada, stayed in transition houses, and made a plan, and ended up in Fort St. John, BC, of all places. And unfortunately, we're there for about 3 months, and I got word from one trusted counselor, community member, that he had passed. And that, telling my children who are 10 and 9 and 2, well, the 2-year-old didn't respond. The response in my kids was diverse too, between sheer sorrow and pain and despair to also, we can go home now, was really hard. And I think all of that stays with them as well to this day. They know that they couldn't do what they wanted to do either. That was their dad. But they also knew that things weren't good. But now he was gone.
Roger.
Yeah. And, the 2-year-old always has felt that absence of not having a dad.
So you go back home and kind of navigating into, so we see your husband, who's a Mi'kmaq native. Prior to you meeting him, he has substance abuse. He's using intravenous drug use amongst alcohol, and who knows really what else. Back in those days, there wasn't a lot to choose from, but it's just a symptom of some of the sickness and some of the pain and hurt within our communities from, 500 years of, abuses and oppression and these kind of things. And, and I don't want to make this about, oh, yes, we're all oppressed, but in the same breath, like the reality is our communities are severely affected today, and the pain and trauma and how it keeps transmuting itself through our nations. And now we're fighting ourselves. The result is we're fighting ourselves. We're killing ourselves within our own nations, right? And how did you finally navigate your way into a path of wanting to help our people?
A lot of pain. Believe it or not, I had to go through so much pain. I had to come to terms with my own situation. The other thing that I experienced was, I think every relationship I had and developed within the nation, the person had disclosed to me that they had experienced sexual abuse or sexual trauma.
And when you developed these relationships in the nation, were you working a position there, or were you just a member?
I was a member, and I was working. So the community I'm from, it has a satellite community that's in the urban center of Halifax, Dartmouth. And so I was working at the Friendship Center. Back in the 90s, early 2000s, there was still that on-off reserve jurisdictional split and some challenges. I mean, we've come a long way, but there was still a high urban Indigenous population. So I was working at the Friendship Center and was recognizing that there are more and more people further displaced, not just by being placed on reserves and separating families, but further displaced of moving into the urban centers and not having that sense of belonging that you do have back in your community. And people were coming from all over and seeing people struggling with the substance use. I remember working with a addictions counselor in a partnership type of form, and she made a statement when she was doing some community education around, the people that we work with don't take vacations. So using substances is their form of escape, their vacation. And that really rang true, because I don't take a vacation either. But I understood why. It is about reducing that pain. When you're constantly reliving in your mind and being externally confirmed through societal interactions that either you're not good enough, you don't fit in, it reconfirms that this is hard, and the system it's doing and has been doing what it was designed to do, and that is to control the Indigenous population. We have to remember that colonization was about controlling the land, controlling the people for greater power, which now runs the entire globe. Basically, we're all colonized, and we're not recognizing that even our thinking is a colonial way. We're looking outside for answers when the answers are in us. We know right from wrong. We know compassion. We know humility. We know how to help each other. But we're looking elsewhere for those answers, and it's really hard.
Yeah, and I often talk about, like, in schools, like, why wouldn't they teach the things that are really important by, like living with some spiritual principles and looking within yourself and looking at really what's right and what's wrong and being held accountable. And but we have such a skewed value system in our regular society for the most part, and we don't even know that we're living in many ways in broken ways, in sick ways, and our ancestors really lived in a good way. And, you know, I follow our culture today, and our teachers always tell us, you know, you work that out with Creator. You go within yourself. You go sit on the hill. You ask yourself these questions. And in many respects, those are reflections of how it used to be and how it used to work.
Mm-hmm.
The reality, in my opinion, is, and I might, you know, pee off some leaders of our communities by saying this, is the best way that I've found to be able to go inside myself now, based on how societies went for the last 500 years, and especially in the last like 30 or 40 years and what we live in today, you can't just discern these things through your own exploration with you and yourself and Creator often. You have to have somebody else go in there with you and sometimes tell you the truth that your ego doesn't want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there's a fine line between real intuition based on love for yourself and love, period, or trauma intuition, a lot of it based in ideologies of what we've learned in this society, right? So
Absolutely. When you look at all the systems that have contributed to how we even deal with trauma, they are all established through the values and ideology of colonization. All of our laws are designed to protect those in power or those with money, those with. So property crimes are more punishable than some of the interpersonal crimes that happen. So the value is placed on our property, not on our person, and that's in contradiction to what I know and what I believe as well. And going back to during that time, it was no different. People were experiencing this devaluing of themselves, and I felt it. And so the interesting part is having mixed identity and being able to walk in two worlds, because it is really two different worlds. The Indigenous way of knowing and being, and the colonial way. And I'll say mainstream rather than colonial, because I think everybody has been colonized and now it's just a way of being. They're two different perspectives, and the holistic worldview is about how we're all connected, and the colonial is we're all individuals and what can I do for me? And if we're not taking care of the collective, the group, how we relate to the earth, how we relate to each other, the disintegration of families happens. You know, the pain to Mother Earth is something we're experiencing all the time. If we don't start exercising what we do have as human beings, that ability to make choices, that is something that is unique to us. We can choose. Yes, it's not easy, and sometimes we don't even know we have that choice. But there's always a different option. We need to start doing things differently. We need to be outside the box.
yeah, and it's hard being outside the box when everyone sees it from within the box. And if you step outside the box, you're ostracized, or you're the one being bullied, or you're the one being shut down. And, you know, in many ways, that's why I kind of built my own platform to do what I do, because I do go against the grain, right?
Yeah.
I do talk about things that I don't think is right in our world, as far as like our structures, our systems, all based in our government ideologies and what they think is right and what they believe is best for us. And exactly like you said, colonialization brought in individualization, and that's what the government promotes, is individualization. Although they preach, you know, something different, the reality is everyone is all worried about themselves. And once we can get away from self and start caring about others in a good way, in a sacred way, and not in man law, I mean spirit law, because there's two kind of laws. The one spirit law I can't go against because there's severe consequences in this universe for me when I go against the God inside myself. But if I live in man law, I'm continually going against the spirit law within myself, and I wonder why I'm sick.
Absolutely. When after my husband had passed, I had my struggles, and engaged in substance use, and the only thing that kept me going was that I had kids to take care of. When I recognized that I needed help, I started looking for a psychologist, somebody to talk to. Once, and it was a journey because I had gone through probably 5 before I kind of gave up. Because the response to me starting to tell my story over and over and over, and it's a painful story. It's taken me 30 years to be able to really talk about it without crying, or even shame, because I carried shame with it as well. I would tell the psychologist, well, this happened and this happened. I had to leave. My husband was HIV positive. I experienced abuse. And the response I got was so unhelpful that I ended up leaving and finally just gave up. I'm surprised that you survived this. Well, the truth is I did survive, but I'm stuck and I'm lost and I need help and I need guidance. And it took a lot for me to come in and ask for this help. And that's the response, because what I was telling them was something that they had never experienced or conceived, all of that happening in one life, in one experience. So it was something that they were surprised by, and that response, and not to blame them, what was a real response, it just didn't help me. And we need to start talking about the realities of what people have been living. In our communities, there's generations of abuse and shame and external control. People weren't even allowed to leave the communities without permission. That human rights type of harm is so deep and so real in our communities. It takes time to undo that. But people in mainstream society need to know what the truth is. And I think we've started on that path in TRC, and it's a path that we all need to walk on together, because knowing the truth is the first step. And that means that everybody needs to know the truth. And it's not a horror story, and it's not this really sad story. It's the truth. And that's the reality, is people have been living this, and, resilience comes to mind because, Indigenous communities continue to survive and thrive in many cases. There are still significant struggles. There's no question. Individuals and families are struggling, and the system of colonization is now visible within our own communities, and that's causing pain and harm. But the system is so big and so strong, in order to survive in it, people believe they have to adapt to it. That's not true. The system is run by us. We have to recognize that we are responsible for that system. With great responsibility, with great power comes great responsibility, and we need to recognize that we created this. We need to undo it, and we need to allow opportunities for healing and understanding.
We'll get back to the podcast in a second. The opinions expressed on this podcast are solely of the guest sharing or myself. We have no affiliation with any 12-step or recovery program. And if you do like our work, please consider visiting Billwardlife and supporting what we do. Now back to the podcast. And really, to me, how does that happen? It happens with one person at a time, right? It happens with one person seeing the truth about their own self, their own journey, and their ability to, instead of going to the counselor and having them say, oh, you poor thing, that happened to you, which is true. Give us some solution. Okay, now what do I do to better myself?
Yeah.
I'll take responsibility for my life from here.
Yep.
I can't change what has happened to me or my people or whatever, but can you give me some guidance and direction on how I can pick up my life and my suffering and move forward from here through these micro challenges of navigating small and large instances of suffering or hardship, that's where we find the power, that truth, and the ability to better ourselves, and then to stand up in that truth, which is the God inside of us, right? Instead of the fear of, I'm not going to be taken care of financially, or, I'm going to lose my job, but that's what the society is trying to train us to believe. And we do believe it, right? And for me, until I lost everything, my wife, my kids, my business, my life, my individualization of who I thought I was, I never would have found the way out. And again, back to your statement about you have to understand the problem and talk about the problem. Through understanding and talking about the problem, I can see the solution out of it, right? So
It's so true. And you know what I find as I get older, things actually come to be simpler. My perspective is simpler. Those 7 sacred teachings actually do have everything we need to do what we need to do to survive, to heal, to help each other. If we all live by love, respect, honesty, truth, courage, wisdom, we have everything we need there in every decision that we make. It is super powerful. And it can be applied in business as well. Like, I'm not saying we need to go back to, I'm saying there is a way to bring the strength of the holistic traditional worldview of Indigenous people, which is diverse, but there are some really common threads, and mainstream society. There is a way to be able to do that. And if you have the strength of both, wow, how beautiful that would be. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with my work at the Alex, what I've been hired to do, why I went there. The Alex has taken on that journey of truth and reconciliation in a really good way, in a respectful way. And they've taken their time, and that's one of the reasons why I went there is that's part of it is doing it in that good way, to recognize that we all have something we have to learn. We need to add a few things to what we know because we don't know everything, and we need to let go of some things. And entering that journey together is really important. We didn't get here by ourselves. We're not going to get out by ourselves.
no. And we're only here for the time we're here. And it's not about how much stuff you can acquire.
Yeah.
It's about how many people can we help, starting with ourselves in like a legitimately honest and loving way, and then transmitting that to other people. That's what I've learned. That's the purpose of my life. And I didn't know that. The purpose of life before was smashing through life as fast as I could, acquiring as many things and as much money and as many selfish and unworthy desires along the way that actually I didn't know it at the time, but made me feel worse about myself, and getting to a point where I wanted to kill myself with drugs or suicide or driving into a semi or whatever, right? So I've learned through, my own path of hardship and challenge that this is the way to go. And that's why we're friends.
Yeah, it is.
Really, ultimately.
Those relationships are the things that leave our legacy of who we are, our character, our values, the relationships that we engage in and nurture. Really, is what we're doing, is nurturing our relationships. That's what we're all about, and that's what builds that stronger fabric to create a better place for all people. I think that's the hardest part for me, is seeing the struggle. It's the struggle is real, alive today, across the country. It's everywhere. But seeing that struggle in our communities and in the urban centers, it's really hard to accept that this is it. No, we have to do more. And there's got to be. I don't have the answer. There's got to be a way. But I don't have the answers. But I am well on that journey to find out. And I think living by, if you're not part of the solution, then you're still part of the problem. I think that holds true. So being actively trying, engaged in looking for new ways, creative ways, innovative ways. I joke when we're in survival mode, we can come up with all kinds of creative, innovative ways to survive. So why can't we do that in ways to thrive? And we need to.
So you had mentioned, you've been through various types of abuse and different challenges and circumstances in life, and probably what you found is as you interact with Indigenous people, all people, everyone's been through something.
Yep.
And your story can become uniquely useful for these other people. And everyone, when they go through these things, they think they're alone, right? And we feel alone. And the shame that kind of comes with some of the experiences or what we've done or what's been done to us separates us. But once we realize other people are going through the same thing, or they have gone through the same thing, and then you can share your experiences as a little girl and as an adult and as you navigating through it, as you found 5 counselors, none of them worked. And, these people are like, that's me too, man.
Yeah.
Right? And so your story becomes your superpower. And the more you share it, the less negative power it has over your life. And it actually expands your life the more you talk about those vulnerable parts of your life, right?
Absolutely. It also becomes part of that fuel for what I do and what I think and questioning. So having that kind of critical view of every decision I make. Is it my ego? Is it because this is what I think is right? Is this what the Creator intended? Why am I doing and thinking what I'm thinking? And it's not. I've gotten to the point where everything that I do think, I always analyze: is this from a place of love?
Yeah. What would Creator do?
Exactly. And to not be angry, because I was really angry. And I've gotten to the point where there's certain words that, they have value in meaning within smaller communities and cultures, but those words are also very harmful because I know the context behind them. Like the word white. I don't generally use that to describe people who are not Indigenous, because white people of the Caucasian community are very diverse as well, and they're on a journey of learning. So I'm really trying to be cognizant of my own bias and my own anger, because I know that's what the Creator would want.
Yeah. And why shame somebody for their color that they didn't have a choice in and make them feel smaller? There's this saying that I love is speaking of intolerance while we're intolerant ourselves.
Absolutely. And you only get more shame out of creating shame for others.
Right.
And we're not going to move forward. The reality is we're all in this situation together, and we all need to work together to make these changes. And it's hard. I'm not going to lie. It's hard. It's hard work. Working with people, we're all diverse, and we all come together with our own biases, and checking them is hard work. When you're seeing people who are really vulnerable and in need and really struggling, it's really hard to see that. And the despair when you can't give them exactly what they need, but there's other things we can do, and let's work towards that. That's hard. And I'm not going to lie, we're in a situation where the homeless, housing, underhoused, however you want to word it, people do not have, all people don't have a comfy home to go to. And the reality is that's one of the core needs, especially in our climate, but in society. If you have that home, that sanctuary to go home and rejuvenate, you're able to come back out in the world. If you don't have that, you're extremely vulnerable. You have a hard time maintaining appointments, getting access to healthcare, taking care of food and other basic needs. It's kind of at the core, and that's something that we feel it at the Alex as well. I mean, majority of the people who come in and ask for help, do you provide housing? And the honest answer is we don't have any housing. We can help you navigate, but the system, the way it is right now, there isn't enough. And I know we're all working towards, reducing the homeless situation and improving, but we gotta start getting more creative, because people are getting worse in their lives and struggling more and where people are dying.
So I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I will.
Okay.
As you just described what you did about housing and how it's getting worse and more people are in need, and a lot of these people have substance abuse issues and various mental health issues, and there's been more mental health issues in the last 10 years than probably any other time in the last since I've been alive, and it's just ramping up and getting worse and worse and worse. And we need to get creative with our solutions, but again, we need to go back to what's creating the sickness in the people in the first place. Again, back to the systems, the society that we're living in, the way that it is and the way that it's set up, the way that the government has the structures set up, and what they're doing is creating the sickness, and the results are more people addicted to drugs, more people homeless, more people with mental health issues. The training that the people get behind the scenes to help people with mental health or addictions, they're taught to not share their personal stories, any of their personal life. I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of addicts and alcoholics. That is the thing that helps them. Mm-hmm. So the systems are doing things backwards, and we're creating a lot of the problems. So again, back to the start, we got to kind of restructure these systems. And who can do it? Well, the people have to. How do we do that? Well, we got to get strong somehow and stand up and put our foot down. How are we going to do that? Does everyone quit paying their taxes at the same time? And, then martial law breaks out. And then, through the chaos, there's always order. But it's kind of like in our society, I'm going to take our society as an example, but now switch it over to an individual like myself. As I went on my journey of life, I used fearful defense mechanisms to protect myself and cope with the challenges of life and get relief that wasn't really relief. It was just temporary relief from, pornography, sex, drugs, rock and roll, using people, using women, whatever it might be. And at some point, I can only do that so long because I dishonor the truth of myself. And then I end up breaking down and having a severe breakdown. Mine was brought down quicker using drugs. And then through that blackness and the breakdown, I can start rebuilding. And that's very similar to society. We're going to get to a place where we got to break down. And part of that breakdown is not putting up with the negativity within the society, the things that make us sick. And it might get worse before it gets better, but who knows if that's even going to happen. But I want to switch gears. I want to go something that really impressed me that you talk about, that I love, that I want to learn more about. You have a background and a master's in what?
Health promotion.
Okay. And a lot of your teachings in health promotion, we've talked about that, is the ideologies within society. And you have a background to some degree in sexual violence.
Yeah.
How did the sexual violence part of your career path happen?
So initially, it was my personal life again, providing support to others, because I don't know if I just have a face where people tell me that kind of stuff, but disclosures were happening with me on a regular basis. And I always approached it from the view of healing. The person who is disclosing that they've experienced sexual violence, often is we need to call the police. We need to charge the person who did this to you. What I have come to realize and learn and experience is the person who may have perpetrated that act, in most cases, especially within our communities, was also a victim of sexual violence. And moving to that person as the area of focus isn't addressing that healing component to the person who experienced sexual violence, whether it was a child or as an adult. So it became really clear that the focus needs to be on that individual and looking at healing that trauma, because sexual violence it's not just a physical wound. it's a spiritual wound. It goes to your soul. It goes inside. It is your spirit, the piece of you that connects your physical, your mental, and emotional piece self all together. That spirit is like the essence of who you are, but that's wounded when you experience sexual violence, and it's really hard to function physically, mentally, or emotionally. And most people who have experienced sexual violence without healing find themselves in other areas of what we call the social determinants of health conflict with the law, housing, poor health, and poor relationships, because it affects your ability to make decisions. So, what started my journey around the sexual violence is recognizing that it's the individual in relationship to the whole community. Because, especially in Indigenous communities, sexual violence has been institutionalized through residential school, Indian residential schools, and entire communities are dealing with the effects of sexual violence, and that's why we have these intergenerational impacts and trauma, and it's real. It's not just a buzzword. These are real long-term impacts and harms, and if you look at it over history, part of the intent of colonization and residential schools was to cause harm to the mind. If you cause them harm to the mind, you control the whole community and the whole person. And that's essentially what had happened through the actions of residential schools and the broad amount of sexual violence to all communities. It attacked an entire nation. And from that, I recognize that that's connected to all the other social determinants of health, and realize that we need to start talking about the sexual violence. It used to be the dirty little secret, or the secret of the family or the community. You didn't talk about sexual violence because of the shame that's associated with it. And I don't think that sexual violence is different than other things where you carry shame. Shame is super powerful. It keeps you a prisoner within the context of whatever it is that shamed you. You don't have the ability to move forward. You don't have the ability to get help because shame stops you from asking or seeking help, for acknowledging what had happened, or even the truth about the situation. So shame is super powerful, and we need to address that. And the only way to do that is to talk about it, to take away the power of it being this horrible, horrible thing that you carry within you and makes you sick. We need to talk about it.
And I always say to the men that I work with, and women, but I do a lot of work with men, and I'm like, the key to this healing journey is to be able to speak about it. Unless you're talking and getting words out of your mouth that have to do with the pain, the experiences, and it doesn't have to be going right to the core of it and speaking about it. You can work your way there, right? But you have to be able to start somewhere, and you have to be able to talk to somebody that has some understanding. And you probably, I believe this to be true. I believe Creator knows where we're broken. When we're on our healing path, Creator knows who to bring into our lives to help us heal. So he's bringing you all these women that have had the same experience so that you can share yours. Probably when you took school to get your master's, they said, don't share a lot of that stuff. But you know, being guided by Creator within you, what would Creator do? Creator would want me to share my experiences so that they're not alone, so that they can see a little light of hope, so that they can release a little bit of that shame. And you did that, right? So along that journey of you doing that, you gave them permission. And as that relief valve starts releasing the pressure of the fear and the pain and the guilt and the shame, it gets a little easier to breathe. And the number of times I've heard somebody say after speaking with me once even, or a number of times, oh, I can breathe. There's that pressure that releases off of their chest, and I haven't experienced that in a long, long time. I forgot what it feels like, but I do remember it. They can breathe, right? And that's because I'm sharing my story. That's because I'm believing their story. But in the same breath, as I believe and I share my story, I have to help them take a path that's usually pretty hard. But through that, like we talked about, that's where the gold is. That's where the God dope is. That's where healing begins. And I always say your story can be helpful for somebody else too, man.
Well, it's interesting because that time in school, I loved school. And I think I was in a good place where I was able to embrace my truth, my story, and speak to it in a way that allowed others in my small, cohort of fellow grad students to learn from a real perspective. When you're talking about social determinants of health, that's all of life. So these things affect our health and our health outcomes. Being able to talk to it from a real perspective actually improved the conversation, improved my academic journey, and I loved it. But it also spread that knowledge so that in the other students they were able to carry it forward too. And I think the more we do that, especially in the institution of education, and it is an institution, the more we will have a greater impact within our communities and broader society. Is we need to speak the truth. My daughter, I hope she doesn't mind me sharing this. She had shared with me that she had gone to a counselor, and this was a while ago. Had talked about her family makeup, and she is a parent to 4 children, but only gave birth to 1. She's in a long-term monogamous relationship. Taking that information to a counselor to talk about the stressors of her family makeup was also very challenging because the counselor had never heard of, I have my sister's children, I have my child, I'm dealing with child and family services, but I'm not a risk to my children. I'm dealing with them in 2 different jurisdictions, Alberta and Nova Scotia. All of these systems that are there that all have shame attached to them. She doesn't carry that shame, but she knows when she's going in to talk about some of her stressors, because she does have some real stresses dealing with the systems, makes it hard for her to get the real support, because the counselor is like, I don't understand. Not looking at it from a strength base. We're a strong family. Yes, she has her sister's children, but it's not because there's a lack of or it was complete dysfunction. This was a good thing, and this is what we did to help each other, and this is how she's done this and carries forward. She's still in contact with her sister, loves her sister, is making sure that the children know. Really, it's beautiful and it's amazing. Her and her partner are. I'm amazed every day when I see them. But recognizing that she does need support and help, and getting that is still, and this is 30 years later, the people who are there and qualified to provide this help don't have that same knowledge and understanding. Our families are a little bit messy, but it doesn't mean they're weak. It actually means that we're really strong, and that's why we're still here. And I think that's another piece of discovering people's stories and sharing your story, is identifying the strengths in it too. And we forget to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge, important point. And you made me start thinking about, as I work with people, and I know friends of mine that work with people, one of the biggest strong points of working with somebody is encouraging the strengths. Giving them encouragement about, like, you've gotten through this, and, that's a great thing. And, like, how can we build on the strength of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Right? And yeah, it's a beautiful thing that you guys can see that as, yeah, we got a bit of a tumultuous family, but in the same breath, there's so much beauty in it, right?
Yeah.
Like, you love seeing your daughter take care of your other daughter's kids, and that family unit, and that's how we used to do it as Indigenous people, right?
Yeah. I see it as beauty, and it is the amount of love in that family, in our family, is pretty incredible from my perspective, because we've been through some pretty big stuff. I won't swear, but yeah, we've been through a lot, and recognizing that everything is being done through love. No, we're not getting it right all the time in the first off the hop, but we're learning. And I think the hard part for me is knowing that we've been working in this field, I've been doing this for a long time. Some of the issues of accessing services that aren't understanding of the realities of some of these more complex situations is still there. And we need to find a way to increase the capacity of service provision so that we do have the ability to understand and we're not shocked or surprised by how people are making it through, because people are. No, it's not pretty. I mean, and that's the truth. It's not pretty, but we're here asking for help because we want to be able to do the best we can and provide the best we can for our children and their children and so on. And it's unfortunately it goes back to the systems not having the as big as they are and as much as they've shaped how we function, they don't have the ability to change and respond to the truths and the needs that are being presented to them in a very quick or meaningful way. And we have to do that.
So when we're looking at Indigenous populations, both urban and, on reservation, and we look at some of the struggles, some of the challenges, alcoholism, drug addiction, suicide rates, sexual violence, there's a lot of positive things going on out there too. I don't want to just always focus on the negative, right? Because there's a lot of healing going on. There's a lot of waking up. There's a lot of culture revitalization. There's a lot of really good things. There's a lot of really good people working in the nations trying to do the best they can. And in many cases, banging their head against the wall, trying to help, but it doesn't seem like they're really getting anywhere. I've had this conversation with a number of my non-Indigenous friends where they're like, why are there more Indigenous people struggling? And why are there more Indigenous people in jails? And as a guy who's worked one-on-one with many hundreds, thousands of hours of time in, I see something. And I think this is what I've seen. Due to the intergenerational, we're talking hundreds of years, many generations, that stuff gets caught in our cellular blood memory. Our experiences of our most recent ancestors, residential school, maybe times 2 generations back, and then, a guy like me coming into the world with my pain and my generations of my family's pain. We have more, the walls of ego, pride, shame, guilt, it's harder, it's thicker, and you can chip through it, but it takes talking, takes programs, takes land, takes willingness, takes many things, right? And I always say to the people I work with, or to the people that ask me these questions, it's much easier for me to work with, I'm going to say a white person and get through all their bullshit than it is with an Indigenous person, because there's so many more painful walls to chip through, and the shame only gets chipped away little by little by little, and it's deep. And the person usually needs something to medicate that pain, and it's drugs and alcohol, and it's, these things. Another thing you said earlier was sexual perpetrators have often been perpetrated on themselves. And it's almost like you got to find the compassion within that, the love within that, to understand that other person's not just a bad person, and to throw him in jail and lock him up forever and punish him. And I work in jails. I work in Drumheller Pen, and I work with people. Maybe some have issues they haven't told me about in that area, but most of them I don't think have. But they're still men. They're still people. And I try to see past what they've done, because they're a human being and they deserve a chance to try to live the best life they can. And if they can pack back into the stream of life something good, that's my job. That's what I try to teach them, right? So I love the fact that you kind of brought that up, and we need to try to find forgiveness, even in the perpetrators of these crimes. Agreed?
Absolutely. Punishment, it's a really poor behavior modification tool. in the sense where we remove people from society and put them in cells and things like that. Healing actually is the better long-term sustainable behavior modification tool that exists, and creating ways and opportunities for people to talk without judgment, because as soon as there's that judgment or even shock or surprise, that shame kicks in. It's done.
Done. 100%.
Yeah. And I think, you know, why I went to the Alex is because they've taken that step and recognized that there's a challenge and an issue. The bigger challenge at the moment is, okay, so we know that this is an issue. What are we going to do about creating the resources and having the capacity to address and provide meaningful support to people when they come in and seek this help, and we can provide it, but we don't have everything that's needed in order to move through that journey? What do we do then? Or are we setting people up for, in my opinion, what'll happen is people will see this as a rejection and then reconfirm the shame and not have access to support and just continue along their journey. So we need to invest in this healing process as a whole society. I mean, I think there's the will in many areas, and I think if you speak to individual people, there is that will. We want to do more because, yes, why is there overrepresentation across the board and all the social determinants of health for Indigenous population? It's because of colonization and the intergenerational trauma and how we're going to come out of that. And I don't know, this is the hard part, is colonization has impacted everything so deeply, so entrenched, that is within our own cultural framework as well. So what is holistic worldview and what is colonial? I look at the word holistic. You see it spelled HOLISTIC, and that has a meaning in the English language. It's not the same meaning of holistic in the Indigenous worldview. It needs to be spelt with a W. And I think we need to start looking at how we're translating what we're being taught and shared. And we're always translating. It's how we communicate. But we need to start going beyond translation and move to understanding from that place of love and openness and compassion, because it is a different way of looking at things. It's not the same. Just because the word represents what you see as spirituality, it's not the same spirituality in the Indigenous worldview.
That's a beautiful way to lay that out. And the work that you're doing at the Alex, you've been there now for, what, 6, 7 months?
5 months
5
almost.
months?
Yeah.
It's going well?
It's going well. It's a lot of work. The Alex has its own challenges with a highly high need population that we provide service to. And then you add the urban Indigenous population. And I think that's the other thing that we need to look at is urban Indigenous and on reserve or nation Indigenous are very different realities and ways of viewing the world and how they interact in it. And we need to start recognizing that the urban Indigenous population is higher than the on reserve Indigenous population. And that goes to, the colonial ways of thinking and knowing and being in jurisdiction. That means provincial money needs to contribute to Indigenous health and other social determinants of health and departments of the provincial government to support the urban Indigenous population, because the federal government provides on-reserve supports but not off-reserve supports. And that creates other challenges because you become almost missed in a meaningful way. If you're off-reserve, accessing Indigenous services is pretty hard. And that's what we're trying to address at the Alex, and not like 100% Indigenous, but at least integrate Indigenous ways of knowing within our service delivery systems so that it's not traumatizing, which accessing a hospital and the historical context and relationship with medical services is actually traumatizing for many Indigenous people, so they don't go. So shifting how we deliver those services in a meaningful and accessible and acceptable way that actually increases uptake to healthcare for Indigenous people will improve health outcomes. And ultimately, that's what we're talking about. When we talk about healing, we need to heal so we can improve our health outcomes.
What would you say the percentage of your Indigenous population is of the people you serve at the Alex?
So
Out of all the people?
out of all the people, so not just medical, everything, it's around 30 to 40% of the population is Indigenous, which again is overrepresented. If we serve a vulnerable population. That's our mandate. And of that vulnerable population, 30% of those would identify as Indigenous, minimum. The hard part is those who are connected or what they call paneled or connected to a doctor at the Alex is about 8%. It's still overrepresented of the population distribution in Canada. However, it's much lower. So what are we doing and how can we increase that uptake of healthcare and connected to doctors? And some of that challenge is that we don't have the room to provide access to a new doctor. So we're at capacity. We have a waiting list across the board.
Wow.
And that's frustrating. And it's frustrating to everybody, service users as well as the staff of the Alex. We know there's a greater need than we are able to meet. And we are always trying to find ways to increase our capacity. But it's hard to increase your capacity with the same amount of resources.
Yeah. Which is why you brought up the point, like a lot of the nations are getting funding, but urban aspects are not, and you're an urban aspect of helping the Indigenous population. You need more funding to ease the pressure so you guys can be more effective, hire more staff, qualified staff, and to do the things we talked about, like, bringing elders in and paying honorariums. And as we kind of move into this colonial way of kind of, serving with elders within our structures, right? Yeah. So, just a couple last points before we shut her down. As a woman who navigates the society we live in, the challenges you face helping people, what are you going to continue to do to try to kind of keep packing into the stream of life for your own self and your own path? And what do you do to stay balanced?
So self-care is a big one. And admittedly, I am not an expert on this. I had to learn. So I like to be able to take that quiet time. What I think I need to do is keep showing up. I can't say that, I'm done. When the time comes, I would say pass that torch, whether it's in a colonial sense or through traditional processes of ensuring that someone else is able to carry on and identify ways. And so these people that we work with and we share stories and they get relief, and then they come back and they say thank you and they just share their amazing feats and what they're accomplishing. Encourage them to continue to tell their story and share their story and their journey and help others. I think that's something that I think we need to continue to do. We need to increase the presence of Indigenous people within the healthcare system, within the social support systems. We need to increase Indigenous people within politics. That's a whole other conversation. But I think, yes, I'm tired. There's no doubt I'm tired. I know you can see it. But always making sure that when I do show up, I'm at my best, because the people that I work with deserve that at the minimum. If I can't be my best, then it's time to take a break. It's time to maybe step back. But the people that are walking through our doors deserve my best.
And I know whenever I get to spend time with you, I always get grounded and I always feel better. And I think I've noticed that in my life in general when I hang around people who are doing good things and they understand self-care is important, and part of self-care is hanging with other people that help ground you and bring you down to a good, authentic level, and you're able to talk about your problems. I can talk to you about anything.
Yeah,
You can talk to me about anything, and we always feel better when we leave each other, and then when we don't see each other, we see each other again. It's like, Tammy.
And playing that music really loud sometimes helps too.
Yeah, I did that, didn't I?
Yeah. And I do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's anything you can do to bring yourself back to the ground.
Yeah.
And stay connected. But these relationships, and I think that's the irony, is for everything we just talked about, it's about the relationships. And we have this incredible resource of energy between us, and it's the relationship. And so it's that interconnection that creates that magic, right?
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
Okay, Tam, I want to thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing a lot of your own story. And I could see the emotion in your eyes and the little apprehension on, do I go there? And you did in such
Yeah,
a
I did.
beautiful way, right? And, and thank your family for everything they've, supported you on, and the work that you do in our community. And thanks for being a friend. So I don't know if you have any last words of wisdom to share, or...
I love you.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love you too. Thanks for being a guest on my session, and I'll let you know when it gets released.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, Tom.
Okay.
Bye.